shit, Milwaukee! It's CypherCon! I can't believe it. That was all supposed to have happened 2 years ago. Holy shit, 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I'm talking to Michael about doing exactly this, coming down here, just having a blast with all my hacker buds, here in the 414 where I grew up, where I bet most of you grew up. I'm a lifer here in Wisconsin. It is super exciting to be here in Milwaukee. I've gone more countries I want to think about to do talks and things, and this is the first time I'm doing one here in Milwaukee. I am so excited. So are we doing well? You guys good? Yeah. Hey, are we? Yes. Cool. So I mentioned 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was supposed to be here with all of you. We were supposed to be doing this party. We were supposed to be doing it right. Right before they shut everything down, I was out in San Francisco. This was the last trip I did before they shut us all down. And I'm out in San Francisco and I'm talking about the same thing we're going to talk about today, deepfakes. And you know, I'm up there, I'm telling them, I'm like, let's not even talk about election security, screw that. You know, everybody was talking about election security. I'm talking to them about, hey, here's how deepfakes are a threat to your business. Here's how deepfakes are a threat to people. This is where they're a problem. And yeah, that hasn't changed, but boy, you know, we saw a lot of things. All these scary headlines said, oh my God, deepfakes are gonna be the worst thing for the 2020 election. Oh gosh, you know, what will the impact be to our elections? Deepfakes threaten the 2020 election. This was our fear, and it was legitimate, right? I mean, deepfakes, they're this crazy thing that we can create these videos that people look at and they're like, wait, is that really the president? I can't tell, right? And it's not just videos, it's audio.
Same problem with it?
You've probably heard some stories. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's even just pictures. People are using images from sites like this person doesn't exist. You know what I'm talking about, right? This is what we're doing with deepfakes, and so it made sense that we were worried. It made sense that we were scared. One of the most well-known deepfake videos was that one that Jordan Peele did of Barack Obama. So of course everybody thought about politics right away. But what did we get? Well, we got Mark Zuckerberg. That was a fun one. We got a bunch of these TikToks of Tom Cruise. Like, wow, way to make an irrelevant dude relevant again. Heck, if you go out, you'll find a ton of them from The Office. I don't know why that one is such a popular target, but my God, there's tons of them. But where's my election security problem? I was told, wait, we're not, our elections are going to be overrun by this. And it didn't happen. And so when Michael talked to me about coming to CypherCon 5.3 to do the talk that I was going to do at 5.0, 5.1, there's something wrong in the math there, but okay. Whatever we're calling that thing that didn't happen in 2020. I was like, yeah, let's do that, but if I do that talk now, it's a whole different ballgame. Because all of the things that people were scared about, we just haven't seen. So maybe we backtrack a little. Let's look at this from a different perspective. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about deepfakes. For anybody who's been living under a rock for the last 5 years and not isn't sure what deepfakes really are, deepfakes are nothing more than ultra-realistic media that's created using deep learning algorithms or machine learning algorithms, take your pick, whatever you want to call them. Deepfakes itself was a term that was coined just kind of by someone on Reddit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's go back to the beginning of this thing. Where did deepfakes start? The technology for deepfakes has been around for decades, okay? I mean, it was 1997. There was a paper released by 3 people who now all apparently work for Google. Shocking. Christoph Regler, Michelle Colville, and yes, I am reading them because there's no way I was remembering these names, and Malcolm Stanley. So they did this paper in 1997, just talking about how they could use this, they could use their tool to go and create these videos that weren't real. And one of the examples you see up here, JFK, why not, right? So they did a couple. They did like a Forrest Gump video with him and a couple others, and they called their tool Video Write, because that's what it was going to do. It was going to rewrite videos. But it didn't really go anywhere. I think part of the problem was we just didn't really have, other than in really large academic research institutions, we just didn't have the horsepower to do this. We were not ready the way we are now. So 2017, let's fast forward 2 decades. 2017 is when deepfakes really started to appear on the scene. So a user on Reddit named, aptly, Deepfake, starts posting these videos. And of course, where does any good technology always seem to take hold first? Where? Tell me. Porn, of course. It's always porn, right? Like, where did VHS land? Okay, it blew out Betamax. Why? Because porn. The internet. What took off the most first in the internet? It was porn. It's always porn. So, what was he doing? He was creating porn. He was creating deepfake porn media of, Hollywood celebrities like Emma Watson, or Gal Gadot, or Natalie Dormer, or even Natalie Portman. These were some of the earliest ones. Now, I don't recommend you do this from your work computer, first and foremost. If you go out and you search like Natalie Dormer deepfake, you're gonna find out they're still making this stuff. So right there, you can already start to see deepfakes, they may not have exploded on the scene when we were talking election security, but hey, guess what? They're still doing damage to people. Now, what's really ironic here is there's been some legislation in the last, 3 or 4 years. Funny this, when politicians were getting scared, suddenly they wanted legislation to deal with deepfakes. Prior to that, these people were actually using the very thing you would think you would use to get these taken down to defend keeping them back up. It's amazing. They used the DMCA to protect the deepfakes that they created using other people's likeness. So that's changing. But let's talk about how these things get created in the first place, because this is going to give you some understanding of where we are today and why maybe we didn't see what we thought we would. So how do you create a deepfake? Well, deepfakes are simply created with these things we call GANs. All right, anybody who works in machine learning, artificial intelligence, you know what a GAN is. Anyone who doesn't, let me quickly explain it. And for those of you that do work in machine learning and your head's down in TensorFlow, forgive me, I'm oversimplifying. I know this is not 100% technically accurate, but it makes it way easier to understand. So, GAN, Generative Adversarial Network. Listen to that name because it tells you exactly what it does. It's going to create something using 2 networks that work as adversaries. So you have these 2 networks. The first is called the generator. Well, that's an original name because that's exactly what it does. It's going to just generate stuff. The other side of this thing is the discriminator. The discriminator's job is to look at what the generator creates and decide, is that real or fake? Or how real is that? More to the point. So we train these things. We go out, and this is traditional. Now this is, I'm sitting here talking like this was like a decade ago, and this was like 4 years. This is 4 years of advancement, right? So 4 years ago, this is what we were doing with these things. You had a training set, you got a bunch of images of the person you were going to try to put in your deepfake. In this case, Barack Obama. Sure, why not? And we use these images so that we can train the discriminator and the generator. Now, this is one of those areas where it's not totally technically accurate how that actually goes, but just bear with me. So then we feed it some target media. In this case, it's an actor who sat down and pretended to be Barack Obama in the Oval Office, giving an address. We feed that through. The generator digs through it, literally frame by frame, and it attempts to recreate that frame only with the other face that it's been trained to recreate. So the discriminator looks at that and says, how realistic is that? Well, you know what, not so much. So it sends feedback to the generator to say, yeah, you're not there yet, try again. And this cycle repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. So you can see why computing power is important here, right? So let's dig a little punny deeper, right? I know, they don't get any better, y'all, I'm sorry. Jokes, as I've been told many times by my partner, I am not funny. And I'm okay with this. So I actually sat down a couple of years ago and built a rig to do this, and I started playing with it. And so we have this thing we call the ground truth, right? That's where we start. That's the image of something that represents something that the generator wants to recreate. So the way that we train these things is we feed this ground truth into what we call an encoder. Now the encoder is going to use facial recognition to find all the various points on your face and map those out, and other elements of like colors and whatever. And it puts it into basically this encoding that then the generator is going to use to try to recreate it. So we have this decoder. And the decoder's job is to take that encoder and try to recreate what was created by the encoder. We get some result. Okay, cool, yeah, all right, they look very similar. So now that goes to the discriminator, and as I said, the discriminator takes a look at the ground truth and what was generated and says, hey, yes or no, this is good. And then it sends that feedback in the form of what we call weights. Weights is kind of how it adjusts. Again, I'm way oversimplifying, but I could do a dissertation on this stuff and you'd be bored to death. So ultimately that ends up in our model, and we loop through this again. Now, this is where it gets kind of cool. So now I'm going to do this with myself and Alyssa Miller. And this is, all these images are actually from the training I did. And so I'm going to feed both of those to the encoder. So now I'm teaching the encoder how to create not one, but two faces. So it's looking at them and it's deciding, okay, it's doing all the encoding like it's supposed to do for both of those faces. And then I'm going to hand those to two different decoders. Decoder A is there to try to make my face. Decoder B is there to try to make Alyssa Milano's face. We go through that process. We teach that thing, we go through the learning, and our discriminator's constantly updating that encoder, getting it better and better and better until we reach a point where we're kind of like, all right, good enough. That's where we want to be. And then all we do, this is the brilliance in this thing. So I just take that to convert this to the deepfake video. All I'm going to do is I'm going to take that ground truth, feed it to the encoder, but now I'm going to switch things up and I'm going to feed what was just encoded to the decoder. And that's going to create my new frame with the new face. Now again, so this is where we were 4 years ago, right? This is how we did these things. And the software I used for this was one of the most popular, still around, people are still using it today because there's a lot of research happening here. But it's face swap. But then we got more advanced. You see, because that takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of horsepower. Yeah, people were doing it in GCP and whatever, but it still is, that just takes a lot. So we started researchers were constantly working on it. It's like, what if we didn't try to create these encoders and train them on specific faces? What if our encoders were smarter? What if they could look at just the general characteristics of a face and build a model that could then be used to generate another face? And we got into what the research calls this talking heads. And it's really just more of a meta-learning environment where instead of trying to, find the specific points on these two separate faces and teach a model and do all that learning, it's, hey, let's focus more on the meta characteristics of someone's face, the color patterns and facial points and whatever else, and we can skip a bunch of that learning. Now, the challenge is you kind of have to have a specific target. So what you gain in speed, you're kind of giving up in terms of who you can create these for. but it makes it repeatable. So now I could take 100 different faces in this room, pass them through the same model, and very quickly, after I've trained the model one time, create multiple deepfakes of all of your faces replaced with one person of my choosing. So it made things faster, and this is where we started seeing now all of these apps, right? Like, I mean, if you go, you see like Face App does some of this, not so well. There's a few of them out there that you can download, and some of them run on your phone because, of course, they're ultimately feeding that all back to the cloud, and who knows whose cloud that is or where that's going, or what we're doing with all that facial recognition data we just uploaded. So consider that, but this is where we went, and this happened in a matter of just a couple years. And it continues to grow. It keeps getting better and better. So, okay, one of the more early ones that adopted this was Avatarify. This one was cool because it was a Zoom plugin. So you could, there's a video out there where this gentleman in the upper right here supposedly surprised a coworker by pretending to bring Elon Musk into a call. Yeah, I know, really unpopular time to bring up Elon Musk, right? Oh, Twitter, RIP Twitter. Okay, good point. Okay, yeah, granted, there's no popular time to bring up Elon Musk, fair. But where were those election deepfakes? I was promised deepfakes. I was going to see candidates doing all sorts of wild stuff. I wanted to see Joe Biden doing blow. Why didn't I get that video? See, there we go. See, I told you I could be funny once in a while. But seriously, so why didn't this happen? Everybody said this was going to be, I mean, my colleagues, I even bought into it. I figured it was going to happen. I just figured there were enough other people talking about it. I didn't need to. And it didn't. Why not? What we got instead were videos like this, by the way. This is a really cool video if you go look it up. It was actually a get out and vote video. So, I mean, I guess we used it for good. It impacted the 2020 election maybe a little bit in some way, but definitely not what we were expecting. And so the question kind of comes up, all right, was this a false alarm? Did like we do the thing that we do in cybersecurity, really super excited and create all this mess and get everybody really, oh my God, look out, it's gonna happen, we're gonna have deepfakes tomorrow, when there really wasn't much to worry about? Or was this like Y2K? Where we got everybody up in arms and we spent thousands and thousands and thousands of millions of dollars on consultants and, oh my God, COBOL programmers were cool again. Now I know who was in IT in Y2K because you're laughing. You know what I'm talking about, right? Y2K, I mean, my God, it kills me that there's journalists out there right now who are trying to say Y2K was no big deal and that we overblew it. No, we just actually stirred up enough excitement and got people enough involved that we actually stopped it. So is this, I started a political thing, someone's gonna come after me later for that, but the question remains, with deepfakes, which is it? And the reality, it's kind of a little bit of both. So let's dig into that a little bit. So, first of all, does anyone remember this video from right around, a little bit before the 2020 election? So Nancy Pelosi was at some event, I don't even remember what the event was, it's not important, she gave some interview. And, some people on the opposite side of the aisle, if you will, got their hands on the video, and what did they do? They slowed that video way down. And by doing so, it made her look like she was drunk, right? Because when you do that with a video, what happens? Things distort, normal speech starts to sound really disturbed and slurred, right? I mean, that's what happens. So who needs deepfakes when you can just create a video like that? So they did that. This video, millions and millions of reshares, even after it was all over the news that this video was faked, it was a modified doctor video, people were still sharing it, they were still up in arms, oh my God, look at how unprofessional she is, she's an alcoholic, all this stuff. Why do I need to spend time and compute dollars if I'm using the cloud to create deepfakes when all I gotta do is take a video and slow it down? So the reality is here, when it comes to why didn't we see this? Why didn't we see more of this? Well, some of it is we just didn't need it. I mean, my God, we had politicians standing on stage screaming fake news at the top of their lungs. It didn't even matter what the news was. It was, oh yeah, it's fake news, or, you know, I mean, if you can do that, why bother with this? So that definitely plays into it. So one of the things I talked about, when I said I was out there in 2020 talking about this, one of the things I was talking about was, what about market manipulation? Like, let's think in the business world, what if I created a deep fake of a high-level figure, you know, maybe the aforementioned new owner of Twitter. Whoop, I jumped ahead here somehow. Let's go back. Spoiler, yeah. So, you know, that was my thought. Like, and I talked about ways you could like conduct modified insider trading, things like that. And of course, we didn't see much of that either. We've seen a little bit. There has been some attempts, but not really anything. We had people building businesses on the idea that they would detect deepfakes targeting your company. All right, I met some of them at Black Hat 2 years ago. This didn't really come to fruition. I'm not even sure if that company's still around. It'd be actually interesting to go see. Instead, we did get some world opinion manipulation just recently, right? I mean, who had this one on their deepfakes bingo card? We had a nation state using deepfakes now for wartime propaganda. How did we not see that coming? Well, the reality is we kind of did. This is probably one of my favorite books of the last 10 years. Teresa Payton, she was, I'm not even going to try to say it now because I'm spacing on her exact title, but she wrote this book in 2020. Now, it was mostly focused on election security, but honestly, if you can, go out and pick up this book, because this book does an amazing job talking about the concepts of misinformation and how it actually works. Because it's important to understand that as we look at deepfakes and we look at their implications in things like the world markets, and we think about how they could impact our politics, or they could be used in other horrible ways, ultimately all they are at their core is misinformation. That's it. And what makes any PSYOPs, misinformation style campaign successful are the same things that make deepfake videos go viral. So I recommend it. If you have the opportunity, grab a copy of this book. It is awesome for understanding some of that. But what about audio tags? Now, that was another thing I talked about 2 years ago when I was giving the talk on deepfakes. And you know, at that point, there had been one case where one company claimed at least that their, I think it was their, like a divisional president got duped into transferring a couple €100,000 to attackers, and the claim was that, you know, well, they used deepfake audio to fake the CEO's voice. Now, I say that kind of sarcastically because there's a lot of skepticism in looking into the facts of it. I'm not sure I really buy it. But more recently, we do have one that does actually seem to be legitimate. Partially because one of the reasons that makes me feel like this might actually be the case, because it was combined with business email compromise. Now, that sounds like the attackers we know and love. So it is out there. But again, it's not like this is something that is blown up on the scenes, because again, why would I spend a bunch of time crafting emails to not only just phish somebody, but then, you know, create this deepfake audio that I'm going to use to then try to further that attack? Well, all I got to do is send one phishing email to some poor admin assistant who isn't, you know, is so busy that they're not totally paying attention, and they click on it. So, you know, it's not that the attack vector has disappeared. It's not that the attack vector was overblown. It's simply that there are just so many easier attack vectors out there right now that work and work consistently, that maybe this isn't the one that we need. So here's the last piece of this. There is a ton of research going on. 2 years ago, when we thought this thing was going to crush our elections, you had many of the biggest names in media, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, Microsoft, all put in money to sponsor this $1 million challenge for researchers to come up with deepfake detections. And we got a lot of them. Like, we started really simple. In the upper left there, you see our favorite villain once again, Mr. Twitter now. But it was really easy. You used to, originally all you had to do to tell a deepfake was you could kind of look at it. You could see distortions. You could tell that like things just didn't fit right. So, you know, within a couple months of that research being released, well, okay, now we've made GANs better. So then we move down below and we see one of our other favorite villains from the political spectrum. And, you know, now it was, you know, they figured out, hey, the deepfake algorithms aren't replicating eye blinks very well. Because think about it, you're training these things off of pictures that you have of these public figures. How often do you see pictures of public figures with their eyes closed? Not very often. So, you know, it was tough, but it didn't take long. Literally, the paper that I pulled that picture from was released, and 2 months later, we were already seeing updated versions of the facial recognition and the GANs in Face Swap that were already reproducing eye blinks at an appropriate rate and with appropriate speeds and everything else. I mean, they had this it's really impressive how they dig into some of this stuff, right? So, all right, well then someone had a great idea, and this was kind of cool. They said, well, what if we don't try to detect the media at all? What if we actually look at what the person in the media is doing and try to match that up to the context of what they're talking about? So they started mapping behaviors. So we see yet another political figure, villain, depending on how you sit. But what did they do? They took hours and hours of Barack Obama videos and they started to map out his behaviors. They looked for very specific facial patterns and movements and other things, you know, little tics and things that were common to various types of content that he was talking about. You know, so when he was talking about something very serious, but you know, where he needed to be more of that compassionate voice, you could see it. There were things about his face that made it very clear. And other times when he was like, you know, delivering a really strongly worded speech to North Korea, well, yeah, suddenly, you know, his brows furrowed, things like that. And so for a while, this was really accurate, like really accurate. We're talking like 90%. Only issue is, first of all, to do it, you have to have that big database of all this different video of that subject so you can actually learn those models, which then in turn means there's kind of a limited set of people that you're going to be able to create those models for. So it was cool, but maybe not the answer. Now the last one, this was really impressive. This came out about 1.5 years ago. And in this study, what they figured out was they could actually detect, and this is the part that's really cool, they could actually detect your heartbeat through the video. And what they found is that what they were doing, and I'm not going to get into all the specifics because I barely understand it, so there's no way I'm going to be able to regurgitate it so that you all understand it exactly. But what they were able to do, and what they found out, is that in the deepfake videos, those same markers that indicated a heartbeat just simply weren't there. So this was like 94, 95, 96%, but already deepfake creators have figured out ways to not necessarily bypass this, but to basically frustrate those algorithms altogether and break them. That's some hacker shit right there, eh? So, I mean, and there's people still looking. I've seen, maybe you've seen pictures of it, there's people looking at, how can I do my makeup in a certain way that thwarts the facial recognition algorithms that are needed for this. People are doing that to avoid it in countries where that's really common. Not that we would do it here in the US in our airports or anything. But here's the thing, these are all technical solutions. As I said, this is a misinformation situation. And when we talk about misinformation, misinformation is not a technical problem, it is a human problem. So when we sit down and we look at this and we say, okay, why didn't this impact the election? Why are deepfakes not more of a problem? Did we solve it? Yeah, somewhat. This is the other side of it. Remember I said, okay, it's kind of a false alarm, but it's also kind of like Y2K, because the one thing we did really, really well was we got the news out there that these things existed. Now that went both ways. That also kind of worked against us because you had politicians who were legitimately caught on tape doing things who were claiming, oh no, that's a deep fake, that wasn't me. Well, I guess that was predictable. But how do we deal with this misinformation thing? Because this is the problem with misinformation is we've seen now in the last few years is that this stuff is sticky. Like once someone's buying into this crap, trying to get that out of their heads is insanely difficult. So the reason is because what misinformation does is, first of all, it plays off of our existing prejudices, our existing biases, all the things that we believe, all the things that we want to believe. And so it's like people will actually be willing to just ignore every sign of, oh, that's way wrong, and there's no way that that's credible because I want to believe it. And we've seen it. We've seen it in political discourse. It's, we see that all over the place. We see it with pandemic information, right? What we do when we're going to launch a misinformation campaign is we attack what we call logic chains in our brain. So when I'm processing information and I'm looking at cause and effect, there's this logical chain of events that leads from what I see as the cause to what I see as the effect. What I see as the evidence to what I see as the truth. Misinformation just lodges itself in the middle of that logic chain, and that makes it really difficult to get rid of it. Our brains don't have that big undo button that sometimes I think we all wish we had. So what do we do about this, and why did I say that we got the news out and that was helpful? So when you're going to try to debunk misinformation, the very first key here is to get the warning out that it exists, okay? Because by getting this warning out, now people are expecting it. Now people know to be more skeptical. At least you hope they will be. And in many cases they do, and this works. Again, this is stuff militaries and intelligence agencies have been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is not new. So what we need to do is start, first of all, just get that warning out, but then it's, all right, I need to somehow, and this is the challenging part now, I need to take that piece of information that got stuck in your logic chain, and I've got to replace it with something else. It sounds like a simple concept, but oh my God, think about this for a minute. You've got this thing that's embedded. It's something that somebody wanted to believe because they hated this person, this politician so much. They wanted to believe it regardless. You're trying to take that out of that logic chain, and you have to replace it with something else that is equally credible to that person. And that's where we struggle. But then the last piece of it is you have to keep repeating that. Because now, even if you've successfully gotten into that logic chain, you've wiped out what there was, that piece of misinformation that they were leveraging, and you've replaced it with the actual truth. You're not done, because there's attacks at that all the time that you're trying to thwart. And so constantly repeating that credible truth, which, God, that almost sounds like alternate truth. I can't actually just believe I said credible truth. But that's the reality, because when I say credible in that case, I'm talking about credible in their heads, right? Which actually for you and I, who might disagree with whoever it is that we're talking about, maybe to us, it's not credible, but it's the credible thing to them. And that's where this becomes truly challenging. This is the battle that we're fighting. And our piece of it from a cybersecurity perspective, even though I know we're talking tech and deep fakes, we're one piece of that. But we're not alone in that. So, before I wrap things up, I wanted to leave you with this, because I think this is something that really drives it home. So Yuri Bezmenov, for those of you that don't know, is a former KGB agent who's done the talk circuit, he wrote books, everything else. But it's funny, because as we've been going through the last few years of this pandemic and the political spectrum, I keep thinking of this quote. Talking about how misinformation functions, what the goals are. The Soviets back in the 80s when Yuri was doing this, they called it ideological subversion. I won't read the whole quote to you, hopefully you can take a picture of it or you can read it from where you're sitting, but the gist is, basically, we want to overload you with so much conflicting information and so much, BS that you'll make decisions. Well, first of all, you'll be so overwhelmed you won't even know how to make a decision, but the decisions you end up making actually are against your own best interests. Now, if you think of what we've seen in the last few years, I think probably everyone in this room, regardless of your opinions on any of these topics, you can think of cases where you've seen that happen. So this is the reality of what we're dealing with. There's lots of really cool things that have happened with deepfakes, right? There's a lot of great things. The technology is insanely cool. We're seeing it used in movies. We're seeing people take things like the Luke Skywalker scene from Mandalorian and redo it and make it more realistic than the CGI that they used to originally create it. Like, that is cool. If you haven't seen that one yet, look it up. It is impressive. A lot of cool stuff, but it all comes back to what do we say all the time in security? It's the human factor, right? That's where we're at. That's where we're at with deepfakes. They continue to get more and more impressive. Like I said, every mousetrap we build just creates stronger mice. So, kind of like every other aspect of cybersecurity, this isn't something we're going to win. It's something we're going to continue to fight back and forth, back and forth. So, I encourage you all to get in touch with me. It's been great being here. Like, again, I'm so excited, first of all, that CypherCon's back. Second, that I'm actually here in my hometown for the first time in my life giving a talk in my hometown. You all have been amazing. I can't wait to see you around the rest of the conference. Do connect with me on social media, whichever of your preference. I'll be on Twitter for as long as it continues to be a viable option. Not that I'm biased against Elon Musk or anything, I promise. So awesome. Well, hey, everybody, take care. Thank you again so much.